copies of Wingmate Rock, which is a problematic card for him to cast on 5 cards.
Well, and he may be keeping it though. We'll see. Yeah, he's gonna go with it. All right, starts off on Temple of Maladies. We get you into the game here. Looks like Chris's draw does have a Wayfinder and 2 lands. Really hard to throw that one back. He'll play Temple of Malady of his own and pass. Wingmate Rock, Thoughtseize, Mana Confluence are the remaining cards for Longoria.
2 lands, a Thoughtseize. One of the lands is a Scry land. I think that's a fine 5-card hand to keep.
And this was the card he scried to the top. It was Fleece main line. He has that on turn 2. This guy could do some serious damage. And here's the draw. Not actually Wayfinder in Chris's hand. He's a Death Mist Raptor. And that guy's going to get Thoughtseize. Daniel, Thoughtseize, and we see Death Mist Raptor, Murderous Cut, Hero's Downfall, and 2 copies of Sidisi Brood Tyrant.
I guess there's nothing that Daniel can really Thoughtseize out of his hand that Chris can cast right now. And there's a lot that Chris can cast assuming he gets to 3 mana.
Death Mist, any land casts Death Mist. It would take a 2nd black mana to cast the Hero's Downfall.
And it's probably just the best card anyway.
I mean, putting a Death Mist Raptor in the graveyard is, there's some tragedy to that one, but I agree. I think it's his take.
For a 5-card hand, this is pretty Thoughtseize proof because there's not really anything that exciting going on. I think I would just take the Downfall.
Yeah. And there's the writing on the wall here is that if Chris's top cards, 2 cards are lands, Daniel's sunk.
It's going to be tough to win.
Especially when you know his hand is double Wingmate Rock. He needs this Fleece main line to deal 12. He takes Hero's Downfall.
Yeah, I like taking Downfall there. I think, if Chris doesn't draw lands for a while, none of this really matters. Well, and if he draws a land, that's probably the best card to get out of there.
Yeah, I somewhat expected him to take the Raptor, just because he knows that Chris can cast it. But you're right, taking Raptor can be pretty bad. He's going to take Downfall, and Opulent Palace was the draw for Chris. Sideboarding, if the top 2 cards were lands, it'll be hard for Longoria.
Daniel at least has removal spells like Abzan Charm or just Downfall to answer the Raptor. But the Downfall just happens. And as you mentioned, with 2 Wingmate Rocks in hand, Daniel needs to squeeze as much out of this Fleece main line as possible. So at least gives him an opportunity to top deck a card that can answer the Death Mist Raptor. There's nothing he can top deck to answer the Hero's Downfall.
Right. So Fleece main line swings in, puts Chris Morris Lent down to 14. Now here's some pressure. If Chris draws an untapped land, that Sidisi is real good. 2nd Thoughtseize from Longoria.
And I suspect this is going to just be Murderous Cut. It follows the same logic. You can answer the Death Mist Raptor with a card off the top. Sidisi, there's 2 copies, and he doesn't have 4 mana anyway.
Yeah, if you take the Death Mist Raptor, you make the Murderous Cut castable. So it's another downfall on this board.
Yep.
So you take Murderous Cut, you let Chris cast the Death Mist Raptor, and then you hope you top deck 2 lands before Chris top decks 1. If you do, you get to raid your Wingmate Rocks.
Exactly. If you rip a Charm, that's great. Then you answer the Death Mist Raptor. And if Chris doesn't do anything for a while and you rip back-to-back lands, you can run into the Death Mist Raptor and then raid your rock.
Courser of Krufix into land. A great set of draws for Chris there.
Yeah, that's pretty much perfect. I mean, I think even just Murderous Cut that turn would have been pretty good, but Courser's just perfect.
Daniel's got a chance. He drew an untapped land for land 4, so 4 lands in play, 2 Wingmate Rocks in hand. Gonna swing with Fleece main line. Nope, no penalty really here. He is bluffing Abzan Charm, and the question is, can Chris call it? I think so. But
at 12 with a couple copies of Sidisi in hand, I think he can afford to call here.
Yep, and he does. No tricks from Daniel. Rather. And Courser of Krufix keeps on hitting. Temple of Malady on top. Though a couple of well-timed Wingmate Rocks can get there for him. Chris has to decide whether he wants to cut the line before Daniel gets to 5 or whether he wants to make Sidisi.
And it looks like Chris is committed to using Murderous Cut here. If he's not immediately taking that Temple of Malady off the top of the deck, it looks like he's committed to playing Sidisi this turn and killing the Fleece main lion.
He's going to go ahead and play a land. Now, to be fair, I do think there's a sequencing thing where he should play the Sidisi first in case the next card on top of the deck is an untapped land. He could have gotten a 2nd free card there.
Right.
As it turns out, it wasn't. So no harm, no foul. Thoughtseize is the next card. The Thoughtseize actually will be pretty good here.
Well, I think, Chris will take it here. I mean, he has no opportunity to mill himself anyway, but with Daniel's hand the way that it is, it will be pretty solid. Because he might be forced to just cast Wingmate Rock next turn if he draws land number 5, just to hope to raid the other one. And then Thoughtseize gets everything.
Yeah, Murderous Cut takes care of Fleece Mane 1 turn before Daniel hits land 5, and Courser comes in for 2. Longoria down to 13.
I think Daniel's draw this turn may have been Hero's Downfall. And it's hard for Daniel to even cast that card very profitably right now because he knows about the second Sidisi in hand.
Thoughtseize from Chris Moore's Lent. Does Daniel want to respond with a Downfall? It's a costly one, but I believe he's going to. Downfall take care of Sidisi. Daniel goes to 12 off that, and now he'll lose a Wingmate Rock.
I don't think it matters too much. I think Chris has accumulated too much of an advantage here. I think it has to be Courser there just because you know about the second Sidisi.
Yeah, if you know about a replacement Sidisi, you should take Courser. But you're right, it's none of this is working, especially with because Thoughtseize is going to take one of your rocks, and that Downfall he's about to draw could take another one if he wants it to. You don't have many plays.
Exactly.
Your hand's covered.
And it looks like Chris does not respect the possibility of an unrated Wingmate Rock next turn. He's just going to burn through that Hero's Downfall, try to get more pressure in play, and with Sidisi on top of the deck,
he's rewarded, yeah. And that's me swing Daniel Longoria down to 8. He's going to cast Anafenza.
Little late to the party.
Yeah, unfortunately for Daniel, it is. You see a smile on his face. He knows it. Sidisi's the draw. Silumgar's the next draw. Well, it's not going to be the next draw because the deck's going to be shuffled. But at 7 life, Daniel doesn't look like he's going to get this one back.
I mean, Anafenza is not a horrible draw this turn. It does afford him some blocking, but the problem is the last card in his hand is Wingmate Rock. If he draws a spell, there's no individual spell that is that helpful in this spot. Sidisi has a 4/6 Death Touchers is going to be too big. If he draws land number 5 for Wingmate Rock and wants to raid it, that involves running Anafenza into Sidisi, which is not a tenable spot either.
Yep. Sidisi Undead Vizier comes into play, sacrifices the zombie token. It'll get any card. We'll see what Chris wants to get. Maybe even something as simple as a kill spell or a Den Protector. And he's going to go another plan. It's going to be Whip of Erebos. I really like that one too. With all the life gain he's going to have in play, a resolved whip is going to be really hard for Daniel to answer.
I think every path kind of leads to the same spot. It's possible with Daniel's list having a couple copies of Dromoka's Command that Chris might be better served getting a removal spell in that spot. Because let's say Daniel, he top decks a way to kill your Sidisi, and then you play Whip of Erebos, and then he draws Dromoka's Command. Now suddenly it could be a game. I think that if you go at something like Murderous Cut or a way to recur your Murderous Cut, I don't think Daniel has a way to get back in the game.
It turns out a top deck of Den Protector, great here. Daniel did draw the untapped land, number 5. He can suicide the Anafenza, fetch Mana Confluence down to 5, and then get 2 pair of 3/4s. But then he's down to 5. It doesn't get that, it's not that good.
Yeah.
He's not dead, but he's likely not winning. The Whip of Erebos does gain Chris just tons of life.
Well, the problem is if he attacks, he falls to 5 casting the rock.
He'll have to chump Sidisi.
Yeah, I don't think that spot really works. It's bad either way because he probably has to cast Wingmate Rock this turn regardless because otherwise he's just saying go, and he has to take 2 damage to cast the Wingmate Rock, and the Wingmate Rock doesn't do very much. So he's kind of just jammed up from all sides here.
I mean, he has 5 lands and 1 card in hand, and it's a 5-drop, and he's not winning on the board, so he's going to have to play it. The bad news is it's not going to win it for him. And he doesn't even go farther. So game 1, over to Chris Moore's Lent. The fight of 5-card hands ends up going his way.
Yeah, you would imagine that Daniel would be able to operate a little bit better, at least early on in the game, when each player is on 5 cards, but Daniel drew about the clunkiest end of his deck he possibly could there on a 5-card hand with both copies of Wingmate Rock, and Chris had a lot of early action, and when he ripped that Courser Crufix when nothing much was going on, that gave him the resources to eventually pull away.
There's interesting dynamic. So on like 6-card hands, I kind of like the Obs on aggro deck because their hands are still very functional on 6, but as you start going lower than 6, like 5-card hands, or maybe if you talk about things like a battle of 4-card hands, I start to actually like the Sultai Reanimator deck because both hands are going to be so terrible that the card advantage in the Sultai Reanimator deck can pull it ahead.
Cards like Sylvan Caryatid, Satyr Wayfinder, and Courser Crufix are so valuable when players have mulligan low that even if Chris's hands are a little bit clunkier, he's likely to be able to draw himself out of those kind of mulligans if he's not under much pressure, and it's hard for Daniel to pressure him. when he has so few cards in his hand.
All right, so if you're just joining us, we are in the finals of our Standard Open here at Star City Games Portland, where we will crown our champion at the end of this match. Speaking of champions, one of the recent champions we crowned at the end of Season 1 was Jacob Wilson. He was the winner with Obs on Control, actually taking down the Sultai Reanimator deck that you saw, but it was in the hands of Reed Duke. His reward, as is with each Invitational, is to get his likeness on a token. He selected the Prowess Monk token, which you see here, and is now being given out. It's given out to all competitors of the Open Series in our 20K main events. If you are at any of our Premier IQ events, the 5Ks, which take place on Sundays on our Open Series weekends or across the country, receive one of these. And if you're not someone who's competing at those levels but still interested in this token for your Monastery Mentors or just your collection, any order from StarCityGames.com of at least $5 or more will have one of these tokens shipped with it.
And remember, this is limited time only. We got an invitational coming down the pipeline in about a month in Columbus. There's going to be a new token after that. So if you want to get the Jacob Wilson Monk token, then just sign up for one of our large events or place an order from StarCityGames.com in excess of $5.
All right, let's go in with a sideboard here. Chris Moore's Lent, the 15-card sideboard. It's been working out for him well. Lots of different options. I'm assuming in this matchup he wants to become more of a control deck, so which ones help him get there?
Just more removal here. I think his copy of Bioblight's very good here. I think his copy of Foul Tongue Invocation is going to come in. I think the copy of Ashiok, there's a reasonable chance that card comes in. Daniel with a lot of high-impact 2- and 3-mana creatures. I think the Crux of Fate is good here, so just the good removal spells.
And how about things like Dragon Lord Silumgar? There is still some removal in the Obs on aggro deck. Can he count on that for any mileage?
I do like it because Daniel's removal is very taxed in the matchup. He has to answer Sidisi. He has to answer Corsair Crufix. There's a lot of big threats. There's only so much removal in the deck, so I like bringing it in.
All right, going over to Daniel Longoria's side, you see an additional Wingmate Rock. That's Wingmate Rock number 3. 3 copies of Den Protectors. Those can give him some resiliency. A lot of his other sideboard cards don't seem that well positioned for the matchup. Ultimate Price, Drown in Sorrow, Duress, Self-Inflicted Wound. I'm not sure any of those are what he wants here.
Self-Inflicted Wound is high risk, high reward. If Chris got a Wayfinder, it's really bad. But if you're getting Corsair Crufix, Sidisi, Sylvan Caryatid, those are very, very valuable cards to get. I honestly think it should come in. I think the rewards outweigh the risk. I think Den Protector is good here too. It's going to be a slow matchup and gives Daniel some much needed staying power.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you on the Self-Inflicted Wound front, mainly because the way of Chris Moore's Lent's deck uses its Satyr Wayfinders. First of all, that's the only green or white creature that's a dud that Daniel doesn't really want to hit. But in this matchup, Chris rarely gets a chance to just sit around with a Wayfinder for a lot of turns. He's either exploiting it to a Sidisi or he's chumping something with it. And once that happens, then Daniel gets to have the Self-Inflicted Wound active again.
There is a question of how much narrow removal does Daniel want in the matchup to begin with. Because that's an easy way to draw hands that have one threat, Chris kills it, you got a bunch of removal, and Chris eventually beats you. But I still think it's worth bringing in the matchup.
How do you feel about Thoughtseize? Daniel has 4 of them in the main deck. Chris is a deck that plays out of the graveyard a lot, but it does have some linchpins.
I think that I'm not a huge fan here. Daniel with Dromoka's Command can answer Whip of Erebos. With those removal spells, he can answer creatures. And Chris does get to spots where he's basically just playing off the top of his deck. Everything gets dumped onto the table, and then does Chris draw powerful stuff? Does he have Whip of Erebos in play? So yeah. I think you can only afford so much reactive stuff. And I like Self-Inflicted Wound because the mana exchanges are going to be pretty good with that card, and the damage really matters from Daniel's side of the table. If Daniel left in his Thoughtseizes, I wouldn't be surprised, but it's not a card I would be bending over backwards to keep in.
Yeah, mana exchange on Thoughtseizes is always negative. Your opponent's paying 0 for the card you took.
Now, Sorin Solemn Visitor seems like an easy cut. Low impact. The life doesn't really matter from Daniel's perspective. I think that's the easiest card to remove.
It's an expensive 2/2 flyer a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I like what you said about Thoughtseize in this deck. There was a game in the semifinals. We were watching Chris play against Blue Devotion, and he had a whip in play and basically got all the way up to a 7-card hand because his cards in hand just didn't matter anymore. His plays on the board were just always stronger than his plays from hand. So Thoughtseizing him in those kind of situations just doesn't do anything. It's not even what he was planning on doing in the first place.
It is nice to break up some of those hands, and especially with Daniel on the draw, I think, on the play rather, I think Thoughtseize gets more attractive, but I think it's very easy to overdo the amount of total removal in the deck. It's important for Daniel to have a dense base of threats. That game, he only had Fleece Mane and Wine to work with, and when Chris was able to answer it, Daniel really sputtered. And the more reactive cards Daniel brings in, the more likely that is to happen.
And we are underway here on mulligan decisions. Daniel thinking deep on this one. I will admit, it's really hard when you have an important match on the line and you lose game 1 to mulligans. It's hard to mulligan again.
Yeah, it does it does affect players. I mean, the absolute best players, they can shave that kind of stuff off, but I think for a lot of people, it does influence whether or not they're going to keep certain hands.
I think he's kept it. So he starts out the game on a pair of lands, Caves with Coilos and Forest. He has a reactive hand, cards like Hero's Downfall and Self-Inflicted Wound in it. The first play of the game is actually going to be on Morris Lent's side. It's Sylvan Caryatid.
And there was also a Satyr Wayfinder in hand, and if Daniel has Self-Inflicted Wound, very good for him to be able to answer the Caryatid here as opposed to the Wayfinder.
But the issue here is that on the play, Daniel's not making a creature for the first 3 turns of the game. That's not where he wants to be.
And Chris has Sidisi and Whip of Erebos, so he's not messing around if he gets some time in this game.
Self-Inflicted Wound is the play from Longoria. Chris goes down to 18 and loses his Caryatid. Does he have lands? Indeed he does. Satyr Wayfinder and with being cast with a land already in hand. Flips over. Pair of Coursers, a Crux of Fate, but gets a land. There's a Swamp into hand for Chris. And he'll just play out the Swamp we know about, passes back. And he's setting up for a turn 4 Sidisi on a relatively empty board. This is looking great for Chris.
And you see a hand here of Den Protector, Abzan Charm, Hero's Downfall. All these cards are individually fine, but the total sum of them is going to give Chris way too much time to deploy his stuff. And that's why I mentioned, I don't know if Thoughtseize is supposed to be the card that's cut. I don't know if it's supposed to be some of the removal, but you can only have so much of this in your deck.
And you see why Daniel is tanking on this hand, because it's got a lot of powerful cards in it, but it just didn't have an early threat. I mean, right now, Daniel's being the control deck. Chris is playing threats, and Daniel's answering them with removal. And when you think about why Siltai Reanimator is good, it's because it's excellent against control decks. It's very hard to answer its threats. They all generate card advantage, and Daniel's not even a good control deck. He's a pretty bad control deck in this matchup, and he's having to answer something that even the good control decks don't deal with.
And this exchange right here just typifies that so well. You know, Daniel has the Hero's Downfall for the Sidisi. That definitely looks good. It's good that he had it, but Deathmist Raptor got flipped over. And that's just another piece of the puzzle as the game goes longer and longer. That could end up with Daniel just not having enough resources to compete.
All right. Yeah. So he does trade there, but yeah, Deathmist Raptor into the graveyard. Daniel finally gets to play something. This is on turn 5. He'll play a face-down Den Protector. Can buy back Wound or Hero's Downfall, but this is Chris's game plan. Yeah, let's trade 1 for 1. Let's put these Deathmists in the yard. Let's play Whip of Erebos.
Yeah, it's not clear that Chris is exactly winning right now, but the pace of the game is exactly how he wants it to go. What he's worried about is things like Fleecemane Lion into an Offensa and being under the gun and his draw being a little fumbly and maybe not being able to deploy his resources in time. Even with Daniel keeping his head above water on the board, when Chris is making his land drops and getting his draw step and Daniel's doing the same, it's really good for Chris.
We look at Chris's hand. It has, you know, a Sidisi Undead Vizier, which he's going to play now. In addition to that, he had cards like Den Protector, another Satyr Wayfinder. He has plenty of options, not to mention this Den Protector is going to bring back a Deathmist Raptor if and when Chris goes for it.
Yep.
There's so many resources. Daniel can't grind through all of these. Chris is forcing Daniel to play an attrition game. I think you're on this step, you're going to see Daniel unmorph Den Protector, get back Hero's Downfall, downfall the Sidisi, and then try to attack, but Chris is at 18, has a full grip. Daniel's going to need a lot more damage.
This is sort of shades of the play we saw last turn with the Hero's Downfall answering the Sidisi. On the table, it looks good. Daniel has an opportunity to unmorph Den Protector, get back Hero's Downfall, and kill the Sidisi. So on the surface, that looks good, but the long-term implications of how long it's taking Daniel to get something substantial going plays right into Chris's hands. And you see Chris going and getting Hornet Queen. That's a trump that Daniel doesn't have much of an answer for. So if the game drags out and Chris gets to be at a relatively high life total when Hornet Queen comes down, Daniel does not have much of a response to that.
So Den Protector will flip up here. There will be able to swing. Den Protector can swing by the Hornet Queen, but it's a lot to ask to say that this Den Protector will still be around.
Exactly. Chris has 18 life points to play with here, and action in the graveyard, a Deathmist Raptor plus a Den Protector. This Den Protector will get at least one shot this turn, and maybe another one, but I doubt it's getting 6.
Abzan Charm, the draw for Daniel Longoria. He'd love the ability here to swing and Wingmate Rock. He can do that. It would cost him his Den Protector. At the same time, He did get back a removal spell for Sidisi. Be interesting to see how he plays it. I don't know if he can play 2 spells in one turn here. A lot of his cards cost 3, and I don't believe he has the 6th land.
Yeah, this would be the kind of turn where you'd want to see something like ultimate price plus a threat.
That'd be
and Daniel has to spend his turn removing this and doesn't follow up with anything else. Even Hero's Downfall plus Fleecebane Lining or Rakshasa Death Dealer, a turn like that would be pretty solid. But if this is Daniel's entire turn, he probably has a Downfall anyway, just because he can't allow Sidisi to block. But again, another turn where things are sort of going at the pace that Chris would want to draw it up.
His hand is Downfall, Charm, Wingmate Rock. A lot of good cards here, actually. But he does Downfall to Sidisi, swings in for 3, Chris down to 15. Yeah, and Afenza the final card. So everything's 3 and 5.
Yeah, and Wingmate Rock is only so good against the threat of Hornet Queen. I mean, that's Chris's best answer there.
There is no great answer in Obs on Aggro to Hornet Queen. If Chris can just survive up to Hornet Queen, which it looks like he's going to do, it will trump out the rest of Daniel's hand.
Some of the lists play something like Bioblight, for example. But it's a hard card. I mean, it's not in Daniel's list, and you can only have so many narrow answers in your list.
Because Chris got to find any card with Sidisi, and you assume he might get Hornet Queen, at what point does Daniel have to just suicide the Den Protector, play Wingmate Rock, and say, all right, I'm going to try to aggro you?
Pretty soon. I mean, possibly this turn or next.
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering, like, last turn even.
If Chris gets to land number 7, it's going to be hard no matter what. So I think you have to play like Chris doesn't find lane number 7 and try to beat everything else.
Sidisi's cast. This is the Undead Vizier. It mills another copy of itself, so there's a zombie. He does have Satyr Wayfinder. He's just going to pass. Already has land 7, I believe, going on. And we untap. We go back over to Longoria. Draws another land. That's pretty good. It does allow him to have 2 spells in a turn now. A turn later than he would have wanted the land, though. I think he really did need... Last turn, he did need to have the play of removal plus threat. We'd afford him more damage this turn. Still would not be out of the woods, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think that Daniel can try to shoot the gap here a little bit. Keep the Den Protector alive for as long as possible. Hopefully get to a Wingmate Rock, or at least force the issue on Chris's side. And then if you're able to keep the rest of the board clear, if you can get Sidisi off the table, for example, maybe Chris randomly can't cobble together an answer for Den Protector. Or at least you get enough shots where something like Siege Rhino becomes a viable draw. I mean, there's hope. Daniel, I think, is behind at this point, but he's at least got an angle of attack. I
love this line from Daniel. So if he... Oh, never mind. I was going to say, I thought he was going to use Obs on Charm differently. He's going to exile the Sidisi with it. There's a chance here that... I, for a second, thought that Daniel might just Obs on Charm and pump up his guy and swing and dare Chris to have a removal spell.
Yep. I mean, that's the caution to the wind line of play.
You could do it twice. You could put 4 counters on it and just swing and say, all right, I got you in 2 turns if you have nothing. I mean, turns out nothing is not there. Murderous Cut takes care of the
instead of
creature.
Nothing, Chris actually has everything, I think. But
yeah, he has Murderous Cut and a Den Protector to get it back next turn, and a Hornet Queen. He grinds very well. And Anafenza the Foremost is a play for Daniel.
I do like your instinct there, though, of at least you can imagine a hand that Chris has that cannot beat that line of play. He's just got blockers.
Everything on the Den Protector. Let's go.
He's just got blockers, and you have some hope. And I think in spots like this where, you're inevitably going to be facing down a Hornet Queen here, and it's going to be so hard to beat that card for a variety of reasons, maybe it's worth throwing caution to the wind. Yeah, it looks kind of silly if Chris just kills your creature, but it's at least a plan. I suppose with Chris having played the Sidisi Undead Vizier earlier, the odds are just too high from Daniel's perspective that there's a removal spell in hand. Yeah. Very realistic that Chris just tutored for Murderous Cut. But I like the way you're thinking.
You want to get him.
Yeah. I don't mind the Hail Mary. I mean, it's desperate times.
It may not be time to throw it out yet. That'd be it. I mean, if it didn't work, you lose the whole game. You just spent 3 cards and lost your whole board.
In pretty spectacular fashion, too.
Hail Marys often end in interceptions. Hornet Queen's the play for Chris. 4 insects into play. And as mentioned before, there's not good ways for Obs on Aggro to get through this. The Den Protector can technically swing past it, but that's about what you're looking at.
Yeah, no Bile Blights in the list, no Drown in Sorrow, no Or I would assume Drowned Sorrow was not sideboarded in. It'd be pretty sweet right now. But
yeah, an uncontested Warden of the first tree can get past it.
Yep.
Self-inflicted wound is not as good.
I like it. Keep punching.
Slow him down. That's all right. You only get to attack for 5 in the air. And the self-inflicted wound didn't pass.
Not the best. Not the best response to Hornet Queen, but again, I like Daniel's moxie.
It's gonna play it out.
Yeah.
And Hornet, the Queen and 2 of her insects are gonna swing in for 4. Daniel Longoria down to 6. And this may be.
I mean, I feel like we're getting
closing in on the end.
There's a Raptor in the graveyard. No end of removal spells.
Den Protector in hand.
Yeah.
Here's Satyr Wayfinder. It's going to mill. Get some land. Mills Thoughtseize, a whip, a downfall. Land. Now you get to have Den Protector. Can get back Murderous Cut. Can cast Murderous Cut. Gets back Deathmist Raptor. As we said before, on the surface you said things looked manageable for Daniel, but when you look at how the decks play and what was in their hand, it was not manageable at all.
Yeah, this is what happens when your draw is a little bit too reactive, a little too removal heavy. Daniel, on the surface, kept his head above water for a while, but once we start getting to turn 7, turn 8, turn 9, unless Daniel is really pressuring Chris's life total, the cards in Chris's deck are just too good.
Yeah, well, Daniel wants to, those trades he was doing, the removal spells for creatures, he needs to be doing those when he's ahead on the board, not when he's behind. If he's behind, that's Chris's game plan.
Yep.
Daniel swings an Anafenza, it will trade with an insect token. All right, now he's gonna get 2 rocks.
2 bees down, 2 more to go.
This is how Abzan Aggro removes Hornet Queen, right here. And token's gonna flip up, Den Protector flips up, brings back Deathmist Raptor. Or doesn't really matter. Gets back Whip of Erebos, and that'll be it. Chris Morris Lent is your standard open champion here in Portland.
Congratulations, playing a deck that was not really on anyone's radar. I mean, Adrian Sullivan has mentioned a couple times, if you look at the regional PTQ stats, that it looks like a metagame of Atarka Red, Esper Dragons, and Abzan Aggro. And there's a whole bunch of other decks floating around on the perimeter of the format. But the Sultai Reanimator strategy, Whip of Erebos in general, has been on a big time decline. Dramoka's Command is a factor there. There's a variety of other ones, but Chris Morris Lent showing the deck still definitely legitimate here with a pretty commanding run through the top 8 of this tournament. Was at or near the top of the standings through most of the Swiss rounds, and